And here is how you can use news currents in your own classroom. Okay, we're going to begin with a Who Am I? And does anyone remember the last Who Am I we did?
We did Ted Kennedy.
He wasn't the Who Am I, he was one of the features. The Who Am I was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, and how did I introduce Arnold Schwarzenegger? Anyone remember how I introduced him? Before that, I'll be back. Okay, and I didn't say I'll be back. I said it like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. Okay, well, I can't impersonate this next person, so I'm just going to have to give you some hints. And I'll be very pleasantly surprised if anyone guesses who it is. Okay, she is going to be the new anchor of the news on ABC, ABC World Tonight. Before that, she got her start as a weather reporter in Kentucky. And then she worked in the press office of Richard Nixon in the 1970s. Does anyone know what Richard Nixon did, what his position was? He was the president of the United States, and he's the only president that was what?
Like, people made him resign.
Forced to resign. Okay? And I can imagine the story she could have told. The next one, she was a political correspondent in Washington, D.C. And then she was on a show called 60 Minutes in 2020. And for the last 9 years, she has been the hostess of Good Morning America. And does anyone know who that is? It is, she's going to guess. Oh, very good guess. Okay, it wasn't Barbara Walters, though. It was Diane Sawyer. This is Diane Sawyer. Okay. And here are some of the news names we're going to be talking about today. Ban Ki-moon, Eugene Bull Connor, Michelle Kwan, Stephen Chu, Woodrow Wilson, Yo-Yo Ma. News places: Alabama, Bangladesh, China, India, New York City, and Pakistan. And news words: boycott, charter, cricket, immigrant, malnutrition, peacekeepers, poll, rickshaw, and segregation. Okay, once again, focusing on those images I introduced at the beginning. Can anyone tell me what UN stands for? What does UN stand for? United Nations. Okay, and anyone have any idea how many countries are in the United Nations? Wow, if you just reverse those last two numbers, you'd have it. 192, that was amazing. 192 countries in the United Nations. Why do we have the United Nations? What's the purpose of the United Nations? What do you think they try to do? Excellent, keep peace between the countries. Isn't it better to talk than to fight? I mean, we learn this as students too. Okay, the importance of communication with each other. Well, it's even more important, or just as important, in a big area where the consequences for not talking to each other can be very dangerous. Okay, so there are 192 countries in the United Nations, and they meet in this big building. Anyone know where the building is? It is New York City, right. Has anyone ever been to the United Nations? Wow, we have a lot of people. Okay, I've been to the United Nations, and I took my whole family, and it was a fascinating experience. But my sons went to the United Nations when they were in high school, because when they were in high school, they used to participate in something called Model UN. And what do you think a Model UN did? That's right, okay? And it was fascinating because I watched one of the debates. And my son Matthew, he was my older son, he was representing China, and my younger son was representing the United States. And they had a debate. And it was a very heated debate between my two sons. It was a fascinating experience to watch them. But you have that opportunity when you go to high school, because they have Model UN clubs. And you show up, they'll give you a country, and that's how you prepare. Okay? And it gives you a good example of what it's like in the United Nations. Now, Ban Ki-moon has been the Secretary General of the UN since 2007. From that name and looking at his image, Does anyone have any idea what part of the world he's from?
China.
Okay, China is a good guess.
India.
India. Japan, we're closing in. South Korea. Right, it was important for him to say South Korea because the government of South Korea is a lot different than the government of North Korea. Okay. Now, the UN actually started as another group called the League of Nations. Okay, the League of Nations was started in 1918. Something terrible had just ended in 1918. What had the world experienced? World War I, right. Okay, and one of the driving forces behind the League of Nations was our president. His name was Woodrow Wilson. And he thought it'd be a great idea to have a League of Nations to prevent a what? Another war, right, okay? But the Congress, the U.S. Congress said, we don't want anything to do with this League of Nations. Why would the U.S. Congress go against the president?
Because they didn't find it like that everybody was like sharing their ideas they might take and make their stuff more powerful.
Oh, excellent, okay? And the United States became isolationist. When you're in isolation, what does that mean when you're in isolation? Right here.
That you can't do anything and you live just
By yourself, okay? Remember, the United States was separated from Europe by this huge ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and they wanted to stay separated. They didn't want to get involved in European affairs anymore, okay? But then things started to escalate. In the 1930s, we had a leader from Germany who tried to take over the world. Does anyone know who that is? That leader from Germany? Adolf Hitler, right. Okay, and Adolf Hitler basically marked the end of the League of Nations. It didn't prevent another war. And what was this war called? Anyone know what this war was called? World War II, right. Okay, but after World War II, they decided, let's try it again. It's even more important that we talk about our problems before we get to the point where we fight. And this time the United States not just joined, but they were behind it from the beginning.